The most dangerous men are not the ones who shout the loudest, they're the ones who notice everything in silence. The dinner rush at Romano's Italian grill moved like a storm wrapped in candlelight and jazz music, expensive watches glinting beneath crystal chandeliers while waiters in black uniforms slipped between tables carrying trays worth more than most people's weekly paychecks, and somewhere in the middle of all that polished luxury, Aaliyah Brooks kept her smile perfectly steady even as pain burned beneath the sleeve covering her wrist. Table 12 needs another bottle of Barolo, the floor manager snapped while brushing past her without slowing down, and Aaliyah nodded quickly, forcing energy into tired legs that had already survived a 10-hour shift at the diner downtown before she'd changed clothes in a gas station bathroom and rushed here for the night shift. 26 years old and surviving on caffeine, makeup, and silence. That was her life now. She reached for the wine bottle with careful fingers, but the moment her sleeve slid back an inch, her expression tightened. Purple fingerprints shadowed the skin near her wrist, fading into yellow around the edges. Old bruises beneath newer ones. She tugged the fabric down immediately and grabbed the tray before anyone could notice. But someone already had. Vincent Moretti sat alone near the back corner of the restaurant where the lighting stayed low and the important people preferred privacy. Most customers saw a wealthy businessman in a charcoal suit with silver cufflinks and cold blue eyes. Chicago saw something else entirely. A man whose name made judges nervous and politicians suddenly polite. A man who owned half the city without his face ever appearing in the newspapers. Vincent rarely visited his own restaurants anymore, but tonight he sat perfectly still beneath the golden light, one hand resting near a glass of bourbon as his gaze followed the waitress moving across the floor. He noticed the limp she tried to hide when she thought nobody was watching. He noticed how she flinched every time her phone buzzed in the pocket of her apron. He noticed the careful layer of makeup near the corner of her jawline. And when another server accidentally brushed against her shoulder, Vincent caught the split second where fear crossed her face before she covered it with another smile. Predators recognized fear. Especially the kind created inside someone's own home. Aaliyah approached table 7 carrying 2 plates of lobster ravioli while a wealthy couple argued quietly over divorce papers spread beside the bread basket. She placed the dishes down with practiced grace, thanked them softly, then turned too quickly when another waiter crossed behind her. The tray tilted. One wine glass slipped. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. Jesus Christ, the customer snapped loudly, pushing back his chair. Do you know how expensive this suit is? Every nearby conversation paused. Aaliyah immediately reached for napkins. I'm so sorry, sir. I apologize, maybe if they hired professionals instead of exhausted girls who can barely stand upright. Her hands trembled as she cleaned the mess, and when she reached forward, her sleeve finally slipped far enough for the bruises to show completely beneath the restaurant lights. Thick fingerprints. Dark enough to silence the entire table for half a second. Aaliyah froze. Instinctively, she covered her wrist and stepped back, humiliation flashing across her face faster than lightning. But before the customer could continue complaining, another voice cut through the restaurant. Calm. Low. Controlled. That's enough. The room went silent immediately. Vincent Moretti stood slowly from his table, adjusting the front of his suit jacket with terrifying calm while every employee nearby suddenly looked down at the floor. Even the manager stopped moving. Vincent's eyes never left Aaliyah's trembling hands. Clean the table, he told the customer quietly. Confusion crossed the man's face. Excuse me. Vincent stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You made the mess worse when you stood up angry, he said evenly. So clean it. Nobody breathed. The customer's face turned pale as recognition finally settled in. Because every powerful person in Chicago knew exactly who Vincent Moretti was the moment he decided to speak. Nobody in Romano's Italian grill spoke above a whisper after Vincent Moretti walked back to his table. The customer who had complained moments earlier cleaned the spilled wine himself with trembling hands while avoiding eye contact, and the entire restaurant moved with the strange tension that always followed Vincent's presence, like the building itself understood power had entered the room. Aaliyah stood frozen near the service station gripping a stack of clean napkins against her chest, her pulse still racing so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You okay?" another waitress whispered beside her. It was Carmen, one of the older servers who had worked there nearly 15 years. Aaliyah forced a quick nod even though her throat felt tight. "I am fine." Carmen glanced toward Vincent's table before lowering her voice further. "That man does not speak up unless something matters to him." Aaliyah looked down immediately. He was just protecting the restaurant. But even she did not believe the words coming out of her mouth. Because when Vincent Moretti had looked at her bruises, there had been no curiosity in his eyes. No pity either. Only recognition. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. The rest of the shift passed beneath the heavy glow of chandeliers and soft piano music while Chicago rain pressed against the windows outside. Aaliyah kept moving, balancing trays, pouring wine, apologizing with practiced grace whenever customers demanded something impossible. But every time she crossed the dining room, she could feel Vincent noticing things nobody else saw. The way she checked her phone then quickly silenced it without replying. The way she avoided rolling up her sleeves near the kitchen heat even though sweat dampened the back of her collar. The way exhaustion settled into her shoulders whenever she thought nobody was looking. Near midnight the restaurant finally emptied enough for the tension to loosen. Aaliyah carried a bin of dirty glasses toward the kitchen when her phone buzzed again inside her apron pocket. She stopped instantly. Fear flashed across her face before she could hide it. Vincent saw that too. She turned away quickly and read the message near the storage hallway where the lights flickered faintly overhead. "Where are you?" The second message appeared before she could breathe. "You think you are too good to answer now?" Her stomach tightened. A third message followed immediately. "Get home now." Aaliyah locked the screen without responding, but her hands shook badly enough that one of the glasses clinked hard against another. "Careful there," the dishwasher called casually from across the kitchen. "You break those and Tony starts crying about inventory." She forced a small laugh even though her chest felt tight. "Sorry." But when she lifted the tray again, she did not realize Vincent Moretti had quietly entered the kitchen hallway behind her. He stood near the office door speaking softly with the manager while his eyes remained fixed on her trembling hands. "Who closes tonight?" Vincent asked calmly. "Just the regular staff," the manager answered quickly. "Carmen, Aaliyah, kitchen crew. We should be out by 1. Vincent nodded once. "Make sure nobody leaves alone." The manager blinked. "Sir. You heard me." His tone never changed, but the manager straightened immediately. "Yes, sir. Of course." Aaliyah pretended not to hear as she hurried past them carrying the tray toward the sink station. Her heart pounded harder now for reasons she could not explain. Men noticed bruises sometimes. They asked questions. They offered sympathy. But powerful men rarely paid attention to women like her unless they wanted something in return. Yet Vincent Moretti had not asked a single personal question all night. Had not touched her. Had not cornered her with concern disguised as kindness. He had simply watched. Quietly. Carefully. Like a man assembling pieces of a puzzle nobody else realized existed. And somewhere deep beneath the fear tightening inside her chest, something unfamiliar began to hurt even more than the bruises themselves. Hope. Chicago after midnight carried a different kind of silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settled between wet pavement, glowing streetlights, and people trying to survive one more night without falling apart. Aaliyah pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she stepped out of Romano's Italian grill at 1:12 in the morning, exhaustion dragging at every muscle in her body while cold rain misted through the empty streets. Most of the staff had already left in pairs after the manager insisted nobody walked alone, but Aaliyah had stayed behind cleaning silverware to avoid going home too early. Home no longer felt like a place. It felt like waiting for tension to explode. She adjusted the strap of her worn purse and started down the sidewalk toward the bus stop 3 blocks away, heels clicking softly against wet concrete. Behind her, the restaurant lights dimmed one by one. Across the street, a black sedan remained parked beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp. Engine running. Windows dark. Vincent Moretti sat in the back seat with one hand resting against his jaw while rain slid slowly across the tinted glass beside him. "That is the 3rd night this week she stayed late after her shift," his driver said quietly from the front seat. Vincent did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Aaliyah's small figure moving alone through the rain. "Who does she live with?" he finally asked. The man in the passenger seat glanced down at the file already open in his hands. Derek Coleman. 32 years old. No current employment. Several disturbance complaints at previous addresses but no convictions. Vincent's expression darkened slightly. Family? None nearby. Parents deceased. One younger sister in Atlanta. Vincent nodded once, slow and thoughtful. And the boyfriend? Gambling debt. Eviction notices twice in the last 4 years. Former neighbors reported shouting almost every night. Silence filled the car again. The dangerous kind. Outside, Aaliyah reached the bus stop and wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. The electronic sign above the bench flashed another 12-minute delay. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting exhaustion. Her phone buzzed again inside her purse. This time she did not look at the message. She already knew what it would say. Another accusation. Another demand. Another reminder that no matter how hard she worked, peace was always waiting just out of reach. Across the street, Vincent noticed the exact moment her shoulders tightened at the vibration. Fear had rhythms. Predictable patterns. And Aaliyah Brooks reacted to that phone the same way men reacted when they knew someone dangerous had entered the room. "Bring me everything on Derek Coleman by morning," Vincent said quietly. "Financials. Associates. Habits. I want the full picture." The passenger nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Vincent continued watching her through the rain. She looked so small sitting there beneath the weak streetlight, uniform still damp from carrying trays all night, eyes exhausted but alert in the way people became when they stopped expecting safety a long time ago. Then something unexpected happened. A woman appeared further down the sidewalk struggling with a crying little boy no older than 7. The child covered his ears while tears streamed down his face, overwhelmed by the screeching city bus pulling around the corner. "Ethan, baby, breathe," the mother pleaded helplessly. "Please calm down." People nearby stared with annoyance. One man rolled his eyes and moved away. Another muttered something rude under his breath. But Aaliyah stood up immediately. Despite the fear already weighing on her shoulders, despite the messages waiting in her purse, despite the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves, she walked toward the boy and crouched slowly several feet away from him. "Hey," she said softly. "You like counting games?" The boy kept crying. Aaliyah glanced at the flashing bus lights, then began tapping a slow rhythm against the metal bench beside her. 1 2 3. Pause. 1 2 3. Quiet. Gentle. Predictable. The child's breathing slowly began matching the rhythm. Vincent leaned forward slightly inside the car. Rain blurred the window between them as Aaliyah continued humming softly beneath the streetlight, calming someone else's frightened child while clearly carrying fear of her own. And for the first time that entire night, Vincent Moretti felt something shift inside his chest that had nothing to do with business, power, or control. Because years ago, before violence and money had hardened him into the man Chicago feared. Now, his younger sister Sophia used to calm herself the exact same way. Vincent Moretti did not sleep much anymore. Men like him rarely did. Too many years spent building power inside a city where weakness cost people everything had trained his mind to remain awake even in silence. But that night, long after the black sedan disappeared into downtown traffic and the rain stopped falling over Chicago, he still saw Aaliyah Brooks sitting beneath that flickering bus stop light, calming a frightened child while quietly falling apart herself. His penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan, 42 floors above the city where ordinary people worried about rent while powerful men discussed millions over expensive whiskey. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected soft amber light across marble floors and dark wood shelves lined with books nobody expected a man like Vincent to read. At 2:15 in the morning, he stood near the glass holding untouched bourbon while the city glowed below him like scattered fire. "You are thinking too much," a voice said quietly behind him. Vincent glanced toward the kitchen where his older housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, carried a tray of coffee toward the dining table. She had worked for the Moretti family nearly 20 years and remained one of the few people alive who spoke to Vincent without fear. That usually means trouble for someone. Vincent allowed the faintest shadow of a smile before looking back toward the skyline. "Do you remember Sophia?" Mrs. Alvarez stopped moving for half a second. "Every day." Silence settled gently between them. Sophia Moretti had been 16 when she died. Too kind for the world she was born into. Too soft-hearted for the violence surrounding the Moretti name. Vincent had spent 20 years burying the guilt of not protecting her when she needed him most. Even now, her framed photograph remained untouched in the hallway outside his private office. Dark curls. Bright smile. Eyes that trusted people too easily. "There is a waitress at the restaurant," Vincent said finally. "She reminds me of her." Mrs. Alvarez studied him carefully over the rim of her glasses. "That is not something you say lightly." Vincent said. "Nothing." Because the truth unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. It was not Aaliyah's appearance that reminded him of Sophia. It was the way she still found gentleness despite carrying fear everywhere she went. Sophia had been like that too. Always helping injured birds. Comforting strangers. Smiling while quietly hurting. The next morning arrived gray and cold over Chicago. Aaliyah barely slept 2 hours before dragging herself from bed inside the cramped apartment she shared with Derek Coleman. Dirty dishes filled the sink. Sports betting slips covered the coffee table beside empty beer bottles. The television blared from the living room even though Derek had fallen asleep on the couch hours earlier. Aaliyah moved carefully through the apartment trying not to wake him. Her ribs still ached from stress tightening every muscle in her body for months. She stepped into the tiny bathroom and locked the door behind her before staring at herself beneath harsh fluorescent light. Concealer covered most of the discoloration near her jawline now. The bruises on her wrist had faded slightly. But exhaustion remained impossible to hide. 26 years old and already looking older from surviving too much too quietly. Her phone buzzed softly. Unknown number. Aaliyah hesitated before answering. "Hello. Miss Brooks," a calm male voice said. "A car will pick you up after your shift tonight." Her heartbeat stopped. "Excuse me. Mr. Moretti does not want you taking the bus anymore." Aaliyah gripped the sink tighter. "I think you have the wrong person." "No, ma'am. I do not." The line disconnected immediately. She stared at the phone in stunned silence while panic crawled slowly into her chest. Across the city, Vincent sat inside his office reviewing paperwork while men in expensive suits discussed business around him, but his attention drifted the moment his head of security entered the room carrying a thin black folder. "We finished digging into Derek Coleman," the man said quietly. Vincent looked up slowly. "And?" The room grew still. "It is worse than we thought." Vincent opened the folder without expression, but as his eyes scanned the reports inside, something cold settled behind them. Hospital visits. Witness statements never filed. Debt collectors. Neighbors reporting screams through apartment walls at 2 in the morning. One photograph paperclipped near the back showed Aaliyah leaving work weeks earlier with sunglasses covering half her face despite cloudy weather. Vincent closed the folder carefully. Too carefully. "Nobody touches him yet," he said quietly. "Understood?" Every man in the room nodded immediately. Because the calmest orders from Vincent Moretti were always the most dangerous ones. Aaliyah spent the entire next day convinced she was being watched. Not in the dramatic way movies showed danger with black SUVs and men following corners, but in the quiet way that made her nerves tighten every time a black car slowed near the curb or an unfamiliar number appeared on her phone. By 6 that evening, Romano's Italian Grill had returned to its usual rhythm of polished glasses, candlelight reflections, and wealthy customers pretending the world outside did not exist. But Aaliyah could not settle her thoughts. Vincent Moretti knew something was wrong. She felt it now every time his name passed through the kitchen in nervous whispers. The problem with powerful men was that they rarely noticed invisible women unless those women became problems themselves. And Aaliyah had spent years surviving by staying invisible. "You look pale," Carmen whispered while tying her apron near the employee lockers. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little." "That means no." Carmen sighed softly before lowering her voice. "Listen to me carefully. Men like Vincent Moretti do not interfere in personal matters unless they decide something belongs under their protection." Aaliyah stiffened immediately. "I do not belong to anybody." Carmen studied her for a moment with tired eyes that had seen too much life. "Good," she said quietly. "Keep thinking that way." Before Aaliyah could respond, the restaurant manager pushed through the kitchen doors looking unusually tense. "Brooks," he called. "Office. Now." Fear hit instantly. Aaliyah followed him through the narrow hallway toward the small back office where payroll paperwork and security monitors filled the cramped space. But the moment she stepped inside, she froze. Vincent Moretti stood near the desk wearing a dark overcoat over his charcoal suit, one hand resting loosely in his pocket while rain tapped softly against the office window behind him. The manager immediately excused himself and closed the door, leaving them alone in silence thick enough to stop breathing. Aaliyah's pulse hammered painfully. Vincent looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You did not take the car." His voice remained calm. Controlled. Aaliyah crossed her arms instinctively. "I do not accept rides from strangers." A faint shadow crossed his expression. Not anger. Something closer to respect. Smart answer. Neither moved. The office suddenly felt too small beneath his presence. Vincent noticed the way she positioned herself near the door automatically, keeping distance while still preparing for escape if necessary. Survival instincts. The kind people learn through experience. "Who hurt you?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah's face changed instantly. Not weakness. Defense. Walls slamming back into place so quickly it almost looked painful. "Nobody." Vincent held her gaze without blinking. "You are a terrible liar. And you ask questions like you already know the answers." Silence followed. Rain streaked down the window behind him while muffled jazz music drifted faintly through the walls from the dining room outside. Vincent finally stepped closer, slow enough not to alarm her. "I know fear when I see it," he said softly. "And I know what it costs people to carry it alone." Something flickered across Aaliyah's face then. Confusion maybe. Because men usually reacted to pain one of two ways. They ignored it or they controlled it. Vincent Moretti was doing neither. "You should not be involved in this," she whispered. Vincent's eyes darkened slightly. Too late. The words settled heavily between them. Aaliyah looked away first. "You do not understand." "Then help me understand." Her throat tightened. She hated how close tears suddenly felt. People like him do not stop just because someone tells them to. Vincent became very still after that sentence. Dangerous stillness. "No. he said quietly. But they do stop when someone stronger decides they will. Before Aaliyah could answer, loud shouting suddenly erupted from the dining room outside. The sound of raised voices cut through the restaurant music sharply enough to freeze both of them. Then came the unmistakable crash of silverware hitting the floor. Aaliyah's blood ran cold before she even recognized the voice yelling her name. Aaliyah's heartbeat stopped the moment she heard Derek's voice echo through the restaurant. Loud. Angry. Unstable. The kind of voice that made entire rooms tense before people even understood why. She turned toward the office door instantly, panic flooding her face so fast Vincent noticed every detail of it. "Stay here," he said quietly. "No," her answer came immediately, barely above a whisper. "If I do not go out there, he will make it worse." Vincent's jaw tightened once before he opened the office door himself. The elegant atmosphere inside Romano's Italian grill had shattered completely. Customers stared openly toward the center of the dining room where Derek Coleman stood near table 9 wearing a stained gray hoodie and rain-soaked jeans that looked painfully out of place beneath crystal chandeliers and candlelight. One overturned chair lay beside him. Carmen stood frozen near the service station clutching a tray against her chest while the manager attempted nervous diplomacy that Derek ignored completely. "Where is she?" Derek snapped loudly. "You think she gets to ignore my calls while I am sitting at home starving?" Several customers shifted uncomfortably. Others quietly reached for coats and purses. Derek pointed toward the staff hallway the moment Aaliyah appeared beside Vincent. "There you are." Aaliyah instinctively stopped walking. Every muscle in her body tightened. Derek moved toward her quickly, frustration and embarrassment radiating from him beneath the restaurant lights. "You think you are too good to answer your phone now?" he demanded. "I was working." "Working?" He laughed harshly while glancing around at the wealthy customers watching the scene unfold. "Serving rich people all night while I sit in that apartment waiting for you?" Aaliyah lowered her voice immediately, desperate to calm him before things escalated further. "Please do not do this here." "Do what?" Derek snapped. "Act like you actually care about anybody besides yourself." Vincent remained perfectly still beside her, hands relaxed at his sides while his cold blue eyes tracked every movement Derek made. The entire restaurant seemed to sense something dangerous settling into the air. Then Derek grabbed Aaliyah's wrist. Not violently. Not enough to leave immediate harm. But enough to make her flinch hard before she could stop herself. Enough for Vincent to see fear flood her eyes. The room went silent. Derek noticed Vincent standing there for the first time. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he asked bitterly. Vincent did not answer immediately. Calm people were always the most frightening when angry because their silence forced everyone else to feel the weight of what was coming. Finally Vincent stepped forward slowly. "Let go of her." Derek scoffed. "This is none of your business." Vincent's expression never changed. "You made it my business the moment you walked into my restaurant and put your hands on someone who works for me." Aaliyah could barely breathe now. Derek laughed again, but uncertainty had started creeping into his voice. "Oh, I get it now. Rich guy playing hero." Vincent glanced once toward Derek's hand still wrapped around Aaliyah's wrist. "You have 3 seconds to let her go." The words were quiet. Almost polite. Somehow that made them far worse. Derek hesitated. Around them, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the piano music had stopped. Vincent Moretti stood beneath the chandelier light looking less like a businessman and more like something ancient and dangerous wrapped in an expensive suit. Carmen slowly crossed herself near the kitchen entrance. Derek finally released Aaliyah's wrist with an irritated shove backward. "Fine," he muttered. "You want her? Take her. She is nothing but problems anyway." Aaliyah's face crumpled for half a second before she forced herself still again. Vincent noticed that too. Every insult she already believed about herself. Derek turned toward the door, but Vincent. Spoke again before he reached it. "Mr. Coleman." Derek looked back reluctantly. Vincent's voice remained perfectly calm. "You will not contact her again." Derek blinked in disbelief. "Or what?" Vincent took one slow step closer. "Or you will learn why people in this city lower their voices when they say my name." Silence swallowed the room whole. Derek's face drained of color as recognition finally settled in completely. Because until that moment, he had not realized exactly who he had been screaming at inside Romano's Italian grill. And suddenly even the rain outside sounded quieter than the fear creeping into his eyes. The moment Derek Coleman disappeared into the rain outside Romano's Italian grill, the entire restaurant exhaled at once. Conversations slowly resumed in nervous whispers while silverware clinked softly against plates again, but nothing felt normal anymore. People kept glancing toward Vincent Moretti with the cautious respect Chicago reserved for storms powerful enough to destroy entire neighborhoods without warning. Aaliyah still stood frozen near the center of the dining room, her wrist trembling slightly where Derek had grabbed her minutes earlier. Vincent noticed she kept rubbing the same spot absent-mindedly, like she could erase fear through repetition alone. "Carmen," Vincent said calmly without taking his eyes off Aaliyah. "Close the restaurant early tonight." The manager blinked nervously. "Sir, we still have reservations for," Vincent looked at him once. "Just once." "Close it." "Yes, sir." Within minutes customers were politely escorted out beneath confused apologies while staff members hurried through cleanup in complete silence. Nobody questioned Vincent Moretti twice. Aaliyah finally found her voice as the last guests disappeared through the front doors. "You should not have done that." Vincent turned toward her slowly. "Done what?" "Threatened him." That was not a threat. The quiet certainty in his voice unsettled her more than anger would have. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while staff moved carefully around them pretending not to listen. Aaliyah crossed her arms tightly over herself. "You do not understand how people like Derek work. If they lose control publicly, they come back worse later." Vincent studied her face for a long moment before answering. "No," he said softly. "Men like Derek only survive as long as nobody stronger tells them to stop." The words landed heavily because he was not bragging. He was stating a fact. That frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Later that night, after the restaurant finally emptied, Vincent remained seated alone near the back office reviewing paperwork while Chicago settled into darkness outside. Around 1:30 in the morning, his head of security entered quietly carrying another black folder. "It is done," the man said. Vincent did not look up immediately. "Tell me." Derek Coleman was terminated from his construction subcontractor position tonight. Vincent turned one page calmly. "Why?" "Anonymous audit discovered missing payments tied to gambling debts." "Anything else?" "Landlord received reports of property violations." "Lease is under review." Vincent finally lifted his eyes. "And?" The man hesitated briefly. "Debt collectors stopped calling him this evening." A faint silence filled the office. Dangerous silence. Vincent closed the folder in front of him carefully. No police harassment. No physical intimidation. Nothing sloppy. Understood. "I want him afraid," Vincent said quietly. "Not injured." The security chief nodded once before leaving the office. Vincent leaned back slowly in his chair after the door closed. Most people misunderstood power. They imagined violence. Shouting. Fear forced through cruelty. But real power rarely needed noise. Real power closed doors quietly until bad men realized there was nowhere left to run. Across the city, Aaliyah unlocked the apartment door with exhausted hands around 2 in the morning. Every muscle tightened immediately when she stepped inside. Derek sat on the couch in complete darkness except for the television glow flickering across his face. Empty beer cans covered the coffee table. But something was different tonight. Fear. She saw it instantly. Derek looked up sharply when she entered. What did you tell him? Aaliyah froze near the doorway. What? That man. At the restaurant. Derek stood too quickly, pacing across the small apartment while running nervous hands through his hair. Who is he really? Aaliyah stared at him in confusion. Derek laughed bitterly under his breath. You know my boss called me an hour ago. He pointed toward the window angrily. Then my landlord. Then some guy I owe money to suddenly says I have more time. His voice lowered slightly. People do not suddenly become generous overnight. Aaliyah's heartbeat quickened. Vincent. Derek looked at her differently now. Not with affection. Not even anger. Fear mixed with suspicion. What did you do? He demanded quietly. Nothing. Nobody protects people for free. The accusation hit harder than she expected because somewhere deep down, a part of her had already started wondering the same thing. Derek stared at her another long moment before grabbing his jacket abruptly. I need air. The apartment door slammed behind him seconds later. Silence followed. Real silence. Aaliyah stood alone in the tiny living room staring at the locked door while rain whispered softly against the windows outside. For the first time in months, Derek had walked away from her instead of toward her. And somehow that terrified her almost as much as it relieved her. 3 days passed without Derek contacting Aaliyah once, but the silence felt more terrifying than peace because fear had trained her to expect violence after every calm moment. At Romano's Italian Grill, whispers spread carefully whenever Vincent Moretti entered, because everyone in Chicago understood Derek Coleman had suddenly lost everything holding his life together, and nobody needed to ask why. One rainy Thursday night, Vincent found Aaliyah standing alone behind the restaurant, shoulders heavy with exhaustion while she admitted she still expected Derek to appear at any moment. Vincent quietly informed her Derek had been removed from the apartment lease that morning, but panic crossed her face before relief could. That is not protection, she told him sharply. That is ownership. The words landed hard beneath the rain, yet Vincent remained calm. You do not owe me gratitude, loyalty, or yourself, he said softly. You deserved safety long before I noticed you. Then he handed her an envelope containing a downtown apartment already paid for, secure, and entirely in her name. When she asked why he would do that for her, Vincent's expression softened with old pain. Because once upon a time, he admitted quietly, someone I loved needed help and nobody came. 2 weeks later, Chicago no longer felt like a prison to Aaliyah. In her new apartment near the lake, she finally slept through the night for the first time in years. Derek vanished from her life completely, replaced only by quiet rumors nobody dared connect openly to Vincent Moretti. Slowly, the fear left her body. Carmen noticed first when Aaliyah stopped flinching every time the restaurant door opened. One rainy evening near closing, Aaliyah carried coffee to Vincent's usual table and realized the dangerous man Chicago feared looked exhausted in a way power could not hide. She quietly thanked him for reminding her that kindness could exist without control. Vincent admitted his late sister once believed everything broken deserved another chance. Near midnight, beneath glowing streetlights and soft rain, Aaliyah finally looked beyond Vincent's reputation and saw something deeper, a lonely man protecting strangers because he never forgave himself for failing someone he loved. Thank you for surviving long enough to be found, he whispered. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone anymore.